All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Tara, would you give us a roll call, please?
Charlie Hoppin.
Yes.
Mike Morris.
Yes.
Mike Ziegenmeyer. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance because it's always good for us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's not where we start, it's where we end.
All right. Oh, I had my reading glasses on. No wonder it was fuzzy. Do we have any members of the public that would like to make a comment here today? She left? Okay. They got that out of the way. Consent calendar. We have the approval of the minutes of the February 9th meeting and the Brown Act resolution that Scott Shapiro's firm makes $5,000 a meeting on having on the agenda so we can have Zoom calls if we need to.
Only 5,000?
Well, maybe I missed a zero.
All right. I'll make the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, were you supposed to do that, Hunter? I didn't mean to take your job.
You're okay.
Okay, good.
Problem.
Very good. Can we have the update? Michael, are you going to do that or who?
Yeah, hi, Mr. Chairman. So today we're going to have our consultant team provide the briefing on the engineer's report. So I'm going to invite Mr. Mike Inamine up to start the briefing.
Like, I want you to know that that report was in decent enough English that some idiot like me could read it and kind of assimilate what was in it. So thank you for dumbing that down a little bit. Maybe you were the one that wrote it and not Mike. He's going to take credit for it.
Thank you, members of the board, Mr. Bissett. Again, my name's Mike, and I'm with the engineering consulting firm HDR, and I serve as the PM for this initiative, and I work for Federal West Levy Financing Authority. By way of introduction, I'm joined by Jim McGuire, and rather than have them introduce themselves, I'm just going to go through the two co-speakers with me. Jim is with Willdam Financial Services. He's the primary author of the engineer's report, which is the subject of today's presentation. And Drew Stresser, who is the general manager for Levy District 1 and Levy District 9. One thing, as long as we're on the first slide here, I want to sort of get out of the way because there's a bunch of acronyms and, you know, even internally we mix them up. So you're going to hear the term operations and maintenance, and you're going to hear the term OMRR&R, which stands for operations, maintenance, repair, rehabilitation, and replacement. And you're just going to hear those two terms used interchangeably. And I would like to say we're going to be clean and consistent. We're not. We're going to use those terms interchangeably. O&M, OM3Rs. It does represent a subject of Drew's discussion later in this presentation, which is the long acronym OM3Rs, represents new stringent requirements imposed by the federal government and the state for operations, maintenance, repair, rehabilitation, and replacement. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the purpose of this presentation is to explain the content of the draft engineer's report that's out for public review for the proposed O&M assessment district. So the agenda is to do a little bit of review. I'll go through this very quickly of some of the stuff you saw back on February 9th, overview of the proposed assessment, benefiting areas and levies. And then we'll get into an overview of what's in the engineer's report, what comprises the engineer's report. But we'll spend most of today on the two bold items on the screen, the O&M budget, that is, what's it cost to annually maintain, operate and maintain a levy, and the method of apportionment, how is this cost paid through by the benefiting properties behind that levy. Talk about next steps, which is basically the schedule, and then we'll go through Q&A. Before getting started, I just want to straight out acknowledge that these are, beyond this proposed assessment, beyond even the service area. These are pretty extraordinary times, and it's a tough time to be proposing an assessment district. But there's never a good time to propose an assessment district.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
So I was in a meeting yesterday, and actually today, and we were talking about that same thing, and the group that we were using actually made a different comment. They were talking about they've actually passed more assessments during difficult times, which blew me away. I was actually really surprised by that. You wouldn't think, because we don't know where things are going to be out a year from now. I mean, we don't know how long this war is going to go and who's going to get pulled in or what. Where almond prices or walnut prices are in the shits right now. There's not enough water to plant rice, and we don't know what's going to happen next year or the following year. So, like I said, if whatever we're talking about, we better do it fairly quickly. Or, like I said, we don't know what's going to happen next year and the following year, and how people's reactions are going to take.
Mike, I've got a comment on that as well, but I'm going to wait till we get done.
Okay. So as a very quick overview of the proposed assessment, these are three basic questions that just sort of portray why we're here discussing this. What is FRULFA? What's the issue? What's the proposed solution? FRULFA is a JPA, a joint powers authority composed of LD1, LD9, and Sutter County, whose purpose is to explore the means of financing long-term O&M of the West Feather River levees in Sutter County. In this case, 27 miles, and I'll describe this in a later slide, of levees. The issue is simply that there's a $1.3 million annual deficit between available funding and the cost of appropriately operating and maintaining these levees. The proposed solution is to ask property owners to approve an assessment to fund O&M through the Prop 218 process. Again, this is a little bit of review, but I'll go through this quickly. This map shows the subject levees and the benefiting areas. This was the subject of the February 9th, 2022 board meeting. The FRULFA levees extend 27 miles from Live Oak in the north to the Sutter bypass confluence in the south. All the green crosshatch is proposed the proposed FRULFA assessment district. The yellow line in the north is the northern limit of Levy District 9. Between that area and the purple line, which circumscribes Levy District 1, that's all Levy District 9. So between the yellow line and the purple line, just north of Yuba City, that's all Levy District 9. Levy District 1 is everything in the purple area, and then the area in the south is a state maintenance area. They all do the same things. They operate and maintain the levees, the 27 miles of levees, and then all three of those entities assess property owners protected by those levees to pay for operation and maintenance. Now you'll note that north of the yellow line is green crosshatch, but it's not in a levy district, right? So these boundaries are largely political. I mean, there's some technical stuff that goes into it, but they're largely political. So in fact, those areas north of the yellow line are protected by those levees, but they don't see an assessment right now. A few comments on the state maintenance area. What happens if a local levy district, typically what the state does is they hand over the operation and maintenance of these levees to local levy districts. Well, what happens if a local levy district does not adequately fund, operate, and maintain a levy? What happens is the state comes in and unilaterally takes over the levy, says, okay, we'll do it, and we will unilaterally assess property owners behind that levy. And so what that means is, the costs go up a little bit, and more significantly, the local levy district loses control of how that levy is operated and maintained.
A little bit.
And in some cases, it goes up a lot. So the other issue associated with state maintenance areas is that the state does a good job of operating and maintaining levees, but because they cannot budget going forward, they only budget for what they expect operation maintenance. They don't don't do, capital improvements. If there's a big flood season, they can't budget for that. And so what they do is they essentially budget in arrears. So like in 2017, when there was a big year and there was a lot of flood fighting, a lot of repairs, a lot of stuff that Sabufka did, a lot of stuff that Levy District 1 did, the city did, well, those kinds of costs, they're not budgeted. And so what the state does is they simply go back after the property owners to get those assessments in later years. So they budget in arrears. That's just the way it works. There's no strike against the state. That's just the way they operate. So the engineer's report, the purpose of the engineer's report is to provide the technical basis for a proposed assessment district. The report quantifies the proportional special benefits that each parcel receives from, in this case, levy O&M, these 27 miles of levees. The report is composed of 5 pieces: plans and specifications. It describes the assessment district, the levies, the OM3R program that's to be funded by the proposed assessment. The method of apportionment is what we're going to be talking about today. Essentially, it outlines the method of calculating each parcel's proportional special benefit and the corresponding assessment. And then the estimate of costs, what's it take to operate and maintain a levy annually. And then the assessment roll is simply a listing of each assessor's parcel proposed to be assessed. And the assessment diagram is something you've seen before. It's just a map of the assessment district showing the boundaries of the district and the levies. So now we'll start by first discussing the estimate of cost, and then we'll go to the method of apportionment of these costs, which is the assessment. So this graphic shows the discrepancy between existing funding and the cost to operate and maintain a levy. Okay, 1.9 million is the total required funding. Existing funding is 621,000, leaving a deficit of 1.3 million. Now I'm going to turn it over to Drew Stresser, who will describe how that total annual funding, required funding, was quantified.
Thank you, Mike, Chairman, board members. Andrew Stresser, I know most of you fairly well. So the estimate of the OMRR&R budget, Sean Menard happens to be with us in the audience. Sean's performed this assessment on 3 other Prop 218 districts. Is that correct? Oh. 4. At one point, 5 of us general managers sat in the same room together to kind of make sure our costs were equivalent to each other. So we're comparing apples to apples. And so that's where Sean came up with the Levy District 1 and the Levy District 9 budgets, which have been approved by both boards. The LD9 is, or the MA3 is based on kind of a 5-year average. And then we also have to include the RR&R, which is repair, rehabilitation, and replacement, along with any fees associated to the district. And then, of course, the reimbursement that we have to pay Sabufka back for the cost of this. And then a general benefit, which is kind of a credit to the public. So at the top, you see annual operations and maintenance expenses. This is salaries. This is emergency costs, OT, during high water events, any benefits, liability, insurance, comp. Contract and operational services is our burn contractors, any private work that we have come in and remove vegetation. And then our basic materials, equipment, and utilities, which comes to $1,020,000. The next line item there in blue is repair, rehabilitate, and replacement funding, the RR&R. And these are all any capital projects, any expense that we need to keep a reserve for down the road. And then the incidental operational expenses, this would be overhead for the 3 participating agencies, FRULFA, LD9, LD1, professional administrative services, engineering, legal, office supplies, equipment, utilities, and then again the fees, any federal, state, county fees. And then you see the general benefit down there at $99,980. So these are parcels that you can't collect an assessment on, but do or are a general benefit to the public. So that's how we come up with our 1.914581. So with that,
One thing I want to stress is on the RR&R, we scaled it down to routine RR&R. We put the whole entire cost in for rehabilitation, and we wouldn't be talking, it would be 3 times that number. So we focused on what we are responsible for, being 11 districts. So there are some RR&R components that the state, being part of PLA 499 and some other federal programs that would cover it. So we tried to nail this down as to the point where it's affordable for all parties. We also considered future monies coming from other grants and other funding sources such as FMAP. There's numerous programs, and we assumed a certain percentage of that RR&R would come from outside sources. Again, you have to look at trying to keep this a reasonable number and also a realistic number, and so that's all factored into these numbers.
Sean, you tried to explain it to me once before, and I think the lack of clarity wasn't because of your presentation, it was because of my ability to assimilate what you were telling me, but I do not understand how, I mean, I can understand why we have a target shortfall of 1.9 and all that, but there's no sunset on this assessment. And I'm dealing with things right now where I've had a 300 or 400% inflation in a 12-month period. And I don't know how we go out with a finite assessment and project into the future when, if this inflationary spiral continues, we're going to outdate ourselves in 12 months. I don't know how we keep abreast of what normal inflation would be, let alone what we're going through right now. But what we're going through right now accentuates my question.
So when we did this, when we did our numbers that happened to be done last year, so it was $2021. And so that was the basis. And then this will be up to the board. We're recommending tying it to an ENR index or some other escalator, which would have an inflationary effect, raising it every year. Some districts we've worked in capped it at 4.5%, because last year what happened to be, one of our districts 7%, but they got capped off at 4.5. That'll be a decision by your board, but with that escalator, that would attempt to keep it current and last longer. And so one of the reasons why it's lasted 30 years without an escalator, the way currently, obviously we're short quite a bit of money, but is because we had some other things that occur as ag land converts to residential. They have a higher assessment, so we brought in some additional revenue. Otherwise, we'd have been talking about this 10 years ago or even sooner. So that'll happen here too. And so we kind of try to factor all that in, but to address your comment or concern is the ENR index or other indexing mechanism. I don't know what was decided yet, but here on the joint powers, the JPA, but it has to be tied to some type of escalator.
But Mike, I mean, that makes us not much, if we get into a heated argument of an assessment district versus a maintenance area, the MA bills in arrears, and that's very clear how they do it, but there's no cap on it. They have the authority to take care of whatever expense. But we're doing it kind of on the other end, but we're going to have an escalator in ours as well. And it concerns me living in the community that it's going to be hard to explain to people that they're voting for X when it's really going to be X with a running factor on it.
Right. So I think Jim's going to talk about this, but we do have an escalator for the included in the apportionment or the cost. And so, one of the advantages, frankly, is that by budgeting for, and as Sean described, that reasonable facilities that need to be repaired, replaced, rehabilitated over time, that's also cranked into this looking forward budget that the state can't do. So that is part of the number that adds up to the eventual 1.9 million. Jim, you want to say something about the escalator?
And if this isn't the appropriate juncture to do it, you know, we can, I'm not trying to interrupt anybody, so.
Yeah, I was almost,
Why don't we do that, Jim?
yeah, thank you for your comments, Sean. And I also wanted to point out that maintenance becomes much easier when you have a project under construction for the last 10 years. So we've had portions of this levy that we haven't had to perform any O&M. That's what's extended the lifetime of our current assessment for over 23 years. The 1.9 million, that is for a total of 25,000 plus parcels, only 24,000 of which are levied. That's where the general benefit comes into play. And then you see for a total flood damage reduction benefit up to 3,700 million. So I'll have Jim come up and go ahead and discuss the escalator and the engineer's report. Unless there's any other questions, you guys want to wait till the end?
And then just a comment, if there's any other speakers, if we could have people come up to the microphones to talk and not speak from the audience, because we have folks on Zoom and they can't hear people in the audience. So thank you.
Good afternoon, board members. Jim McGuire with Wildan Financial Services. To speak to the question about the inflationary formula, it's a balancing act. You could develop a flat out inflationary adjustment for the assessments going forward that's fairly high, but then you have to balance that with people voting, and they're not going to vote for an open-ended, you know, assessment with some high inflationary value that you put on it. Like, we could just take flat CPI and just base it on that. So right now, January CPI is 7.5%. And so you could have a 7.5% jump in the assessments for next year right off of the bat, if that's what stays for the average for the year. Problem is people are going to be leery of that. So the consensus was to develop an inflationary adjustment that set a cap at 4%. It's based on CPI, but sets a cap of 4%. Over the last 25 years, 25, 30 years, the average is about 3.2%. So having that cap of 4 is a reasonable number. But it gives some assurance to property owners voting for this that we're not gonna deal with runaway inflation on an assessment. And so the formula that we've developed and as part of the ballot will be included this annual inflationary adjustment. So they'll be voting on their what their proposed current maximum assessment is with an inflationary adjustment. The long-term prognosis even though we're capping it at 4%, even with the high inflation, long as it doesn't go for the next 15 years or so, and we get back to normal, you know, after a few years, you have development which will occur, which will raise the values that each property pays, the amount that they pay because of the values of the property. You know, you get structures on agricultural land, you have residential development or commercial development on those properties instead. So we'll generate more revenue. You're also going, because part of the money that's being collected for the 3 Rs is actually being set aside, and you're going to be collecting fund interest on that money that you're setting aside and keeping in the bank for long-term expenditures. So that'll also help adjust and keep balance in the overall amount that we should.
Before you go too far, on the inflationary part of it, you say from, you know, conversion of land to other purposes, ag to residential or structures, does that also include inflationary values of land that hasn't changed its purpose? If you have a piece of bare land and all of a sudden it goes up 50%, do the assessments go up accordingly?
Yes. The inflationary adjustment is actually applied to the assessment rate that Drew alluded to, the 0.005. That's multiplied by each parcel's individual benefit units that's assigned to their property. So that as that number increases by CPI each year, or 4% if CPI goes over 4%, because we're capping it at 4%. That number keeps going up every year. So when you multiply that number times, if nothing changes in the district in terms of land use, which isn't likely, but if nothing changes, everybody's assessment is going to go up basically by 4% CPI or 4%. So those assessments will continue to increase without any changes in property. But you also have the added value that as properties develop, you're going to generate more benefit units. That same inflationary adjustment is still going to be applied, and so you're going to be generating more revenue.
Can I jump in just for a second? Because I feel, Jim, that you may have answered a slightly different question than Charlie asked, if I heard you correctly, Charlie. I thought you were asking, if I have a home and the home is worth $500,000 today, and in 10 years the home is worth $1 million, will the assessment double?
That's exactly right.
Okay, and Jim, your answer was, because the answer to that is no, because the assessment's not based on the property value. Jim's answer was more, CPI will continue to go up, and if the land use changes and it becomes a more valuable land use, then the assessment will go.
I understand the change in land use, but I was concerned about a static situation with land. And like you say, if it doubled, which isn't unusual,
then your assessment won't change as a result of the doubling. It will change as a result of CPI increases every year.
Thanks.
So theoretically, if you have a 50-acre agricultural property, your assessment next year will be likely, within the way inflation's going right now, will be 4% greater than what we're proposing right now in terms of this year's assessment and what they'll be balloted for. So what I'm here to speak to is the methodology. So the method of apportionment is basically a calculation of the proportional special benefit allocation of the total cost of the assessments to properties within the district. And it's based, and special benefit is based on potential damages avoided. And those damages are calculated for each property based on their structure damage, content damage, and land damage. And it's a proportional allocation to those properties. The structure and content value damages are dependent on the relative structure and content value, which is basically a table setting up a proportional value of the properties that was developed by the Army Corps of Engineers. The flood depth associated with the property. Oh, we're on the wrong slide. Probably should jump to the slide. So we have the flood depth reduction, which is shown by the actual mapping of the different flood depths of properties throughout the proposed district. The percentage of flood damage reduction, which is based off of those various flood depths. They're grouped into 4 different flood ranges, 0 to 2 feet, 2 to 4 feet, 4 to 6 feet, and 6 feet and greater. And those are all shown by the various colors across the map. Those flood damages, and then of course the flood damage percentage is associated with each of those. So obviously as the flooding gets deeper and deeper, the percentage of damage to properties gets greater and greater. And then obviously the last thing is the actual structure size. And I won't go too much into the percentages themselves, but they're again developed by the Army Corps. The structural damage and the percent damages are consistent with what was done with the Sabufka assessment. It's exactly the same tables. The next portion of an assessment is the land damage, the relative land damage factor, which is shown here next slide, sorry. The land damage factor you can see it at the table to the right. That was developed as an algorithm based on overall assessed values of properties within each different land use classification over a 5-year period as an algorithm to the percentage of structural and content value assessment. So it established a ratio on the same type of proportionality, but all by land uses. That times the parcel's acreage determines the amount of land damage associated with a property. So the combination of the structure and content damage calculated and the land damage calculated for each parcel collectively establishes the benefit units special benefit units associated with each parcel. Next slide. So the overall method of apportionment, I thought it would be advantageous just to kind of go through a fairly simple calculation. So for a residential single-family property on 0.179 acres, which is basic, typical tract size lot, a building square footage of 2,000 square feet and a flood depth of 3, which puts them into the second tier of flood damage reduction percentage of the 2 to 4 feet. So they fall into that category. So the structure damage takes the 2,000 square foot of the building, the relative damage calculation of $60 per square foot times the 35%, which is based on their flood depth, gives you 42,000 benefit units. The content damage is the same thing, 2,000 square feet times this value of $30 a square foot times the 35% gives you 21,000 benefit units. And then the land damage is the acreage, the 1.79 acres, times the 46,950 associated with residential properties, gives you 8,404 benefit units. Those all added together is 71,404 benefit units for a typical single family residential property. That amount, that benefit unit for that particular property times our assessment rate of 0.0050445 gives you an assessment of $36.02. And that would be the amount that they're actually balloted for. So any other questions for me or anyone else, I suppose? I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Okay, so as far as the next steps, this graphic shows key dates going forward. So beginning today, the engineer's report is out for public review. On April 9th, the FRULFA board will consider a resolution of intent to form an assessment district and approve the engineer's report for balloting. That's right. Right, so it's correct on the slide. So, yeah, so it's correct. It is correct on the slide. So don't pay attention to my words. Look at what's on the slide. And then on May 6th, the ballots will be mailed to property owners on May 6th. On May 6th, a public hearing is held and balloting closes on June 22nd. Okay, so public hearings conducted and then the balloting closes. Depending on the outcome of that, they'll be voted, they'll be counted, and balloting results will be announced on June 30th. And then it will be up to the board to approve the formation of an assessment district. So that's the process. Those are the key dates. Before I leave this, there's important contacts, and we'll leave some FAQs with this. If anybody has any questions, there are 3 ways to get a hold of us. To respond, hotline is a voicemail messaging service. These messages are picked up every business day, and we respond to them as quickly as we can. You can also email questions to the email on the screen. And you can go to the website and use the website calculator to punch in an APN and to determine what your proposed assessment is for any individual property.
Mike, by any chance, do we know if we've gotten any questions or anything from public?
Well, we've gotten a lot of questions. Most of them have been through personal contact. I can't speak to the traffic on the hotline.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, I've commented before to several of you that I don't understand when this public outreach is going to kick in, because I'd be willing to bet a significant amount of money that if you drew 100 names out of the phone directory and had Kim Floyd call them random and asked them if they knew there was an assessment process underway, I bet there wouldn't be 5% of them that knew we were doing this. And I don't know how we're going to get to the point where people know that. And, you know, I suppose if there was a devious side to me, it'd be our advantage that people didn't know about it because they wouldn't cast a no vote on it because they probably wouldn't pay any attention to it. But I just don't think we've done a good job of reaching the public on this at all. Not even kind of.
Charlie? Yeah. Just so you know, with the chamber meeting that they had, it went very, very well.
No, I know the chamber meeting went well, and I was really pleased that they gave it their blessings, but I don't know. I think there's too much of an assumption that people fling through the internet every night and see what websites are out there and what information's on it. And I'm not being critical because I know a better way to do it. I just don't think it's getting done. But maybe everybody else thinks it is.
So there's a couple of, this is a great point, first of all. And I agree with your characterization of what awareness is right now. And so over the next month and a half, there's a lot of things that have to take place. One is a direct mailer. The second is the open house on May 10th, which will be noticed with this mailer and a newsletter that alerts people to all protected properties. Hey, there's something coming. Please show up at the public open house, a public meeting that takes place on May 10th. There is a local group, grassroots organization, that is sponsoring levee tours that will be noticed. Those dates are a little fuzzy right now, but it looks to be in mid-April on 2 Saturdays. And those would be opportunities not only for people to see what work has been done on these rehabilitated levees, but also an opportunity, just like in any public meeting, to address the public and get the word out. So in addition to that, the outreach campaign also includes a laundry list of, and this all takes place in the next 6 weeks, of public engagements with Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, the Chamber, city councils, the Board of Supervisors was done, and numerous property owners to leverage, the social network, the real social network, especially in Sutter County where everybody knows everybody, to get the word out that this is happening. So there's a number of things that are happening that don't appear on this schedule to address your issue. It is, I think it's the correct, you started off your comment, and I think that's absolutely correct, and the onus is on us, on FRULFA and staff, to get the word out. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
Mike, Mike?
No, I was just thinking, that's all.
One other thing, where the map on the flood depth doesn't follow county roads, which it shouldn't, it follows elevations. I think when you have these public meetings, you need to have a much better defined map that has roads that intersect your diagram of flood depth. So people, when I look at that map, I can't tell what roads are where really. And I think the flood depth is a critical thing in Jim's calculation, obviously, but for the public to relate to it, I think they need to be able to cross-section that with road junctures.
Yeah, that's a good comment, and we've received some constructive criticism about that for any individual property owner. So we'll put some milestones and roads on that map. Okay. Right.
Thank you, Mike.
it may mean more if he hears it from the staff, to your point. Yeah, so when you go to the website calculator as well, you will see, the location of that property. It's reflected on the website calculator.
No, I know it.
What zone you want?
I know it does. I've looked at the calculator and.
But your comment, I think, was more to the map, that people look at a bunch of colors, they don't necessarily know where their property sits.
No, and
I understand.
The map follows anticipated elevations, but it's just kind of a map of the area.
Right.
Without crossroads.
Yeah, that's an easy fix.
We need a bigger visual. The problem is the map's small underneath.
Yeah, there's a lot of simple people like me in this community, that's the problem.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Seth, are you beckoning to get up there for something? Oh. Who handles the services update?
So this is the services update. So Seth Wurzel is going to handle this, our budget manager.
As we have done for prior FRULFA board meetings, we just are letting the board know about where we are with respect to the budget, the $596,000 of SBUFCA funds that were budgeted, and where we are with cost to date. So the remaining, the cost to date were about $300,000. With a remaining about $298,000. One of the strategies that we're taking with respect to funding this from the Sutter Butte side is to try to maximize as much of the regional flood management planning dollars that have been made available as possible. So we expect to come in well under this budget as a result of being able to allocate Sutter Butte staff time and support time and consultant support time to the regional flood management planning grants. In addition, when we get forward toward when the assessment is successful and we advance the annexation process with MA3, we'll be able to allocate all of that work as well over to the regional flood management planning grant. So that's the totality of this services update. It was just a regular update of where we are with respect to that budget. Okay.
Thank you, Seth. Questions? Nope. Michael, do you have anything else?
I do not, Mr. Chairman. That's it.
Mr. Shapiro?
No. Thank you.
Very good. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.